I was like, well, I'm just going to have to tell Adam, because Adam's not already busy enough. So I called Guy like a half hour later, and I said, hey, Guy, dude, I'll preach, man. I'm looking forward to it. I have a hard time saying no to Guy because I want to make him proud, and I want him to know that all the resources and energy he's dumping into me, that I'm willingly accepting it, and I appreciate what he's doing. But I said, where are you going to be at? And he goes, I'm going to be in California. I was like, oh, yeah, ha, Mr. Guy Fawns, you get to go to California, huh? It's awesome. I was like, where are you going out in California? And he's like, well, I'm going to go to L.A., and then we're going down to San Diego, and then we're going to go a place north of San Diego called Vista, and it has the most nicest climate in the continental United States. I was like, let me get this right, man. You get to go to California. I get to stay here and preach out of the Old Testament. Nice. The timing at Guy Fawns. I'll tell you what, though. The Old Testament actually is in some cases, a lot easier to preach out of than the New Testament. Last time I was up here, I told you about my wife and I's calling to the Pacific Northwest. I want to give you an update on that and kind of fill you in as far as I know right now. Guy called the district, the Pacific Northwest District, and we started something called the assessment process. And the assessment process is a process that they've had in place in Washington and Oregon for 15 years now. And what it is, when you go out to plant a church, they have basically steps that you follow, and they critique you and draw you in and see where you're at and where you're going and how they can help you in this process. The first step in the process, is you have a half-hour phone conversation, like a conference call, with the head church planter out there, whose name is Randy, and your spouse. So my wife and I, we had this. It was supposed to be a half hour. It went like an hour. And the next step was, and I felt okay about the conversation the longer time went on after it. I'm just so excited to get out there, and I really want to go now, but there's a lot of things going on that God's preparing us for, and I still have to remember to walk through some of that. But the next step was, Randy's like, okay, I'm going to send you some paperwork, and you're going to fill out some questions, and then you're going to send those back. And then upon the arrival of those questions, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to look at where you're at by answering these questions. I'm going to be able to tell. And then we're going to have another conversation on the phone that's going to be about an hour. And if everything goes according, in November, my wife and I will be flying out there. It'll be either be in Portland or Seattle, I'm not for sure. But we'll be out there for 4 days, and we'll be with a handful of other couples who want to also plant churches in Oregon and Washington. And we want to plant in Portland. That's where I want to go. That's where I feel led to go. But in these 4 days, they basically put you through a process where they want to find out where your weaknesses are. They want to find out where your strengths are. And they bring in a psychologist, which is funny because the church is going to give me a mental evaluation. Think about it. It could be scary, though. But at the end of the 4 days, they basically, there's three things. There's a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. And the green light is, come out here now. We want to help you plant a church. The yellow light is, we want you to come out here and plant a church. Here's your areas of weakness, and here's where you need to grow, and here's what we're going to do to help you grow in those areas. And here's the time frame we're looking at. And then the red light is, we would encourage you to never come out here and plant a church. But they never give out green lights, so there's only two we can really get, so we'll see what happens. But, probably the next time I'm up here preaching, I'll have more. And if I don't talk about Portland, then you'll know that we're not going to Portland. So don't ask me about it after I get done preaching. But I really feel that's where God's leading us. I could be wrong, but I feel it very strongly. And it's not necessarily feeling called to the geographical aspect of Portland. It's feeling called to the people. I have a heart for the people, and that's why I'm sorry. Is this all right? It's the hair. Seth's laughing at me. All right, if you want to go ahead and open up your Bibles, we're going to do Exodus 5 today. Exodus 5 is interesting because you're going to see a handful of mechanisms going on and the way God is working through two different kinds of people. You're going to see God working through somebody who doesn't know God, whose heart is hardened for God, and then you're going to see a group of people that God is doing things in that know Him but have walked away from Him, and He's calling them back. I was talking to Guy about Exodus 5 when him and Brock and I were at lunch on Wednesday, and he said, "Have you started on your sermon?" And I said, "Yeah, I only have 2 nights to write this sermon, and I had to get it going." And he was like, "Well, what's the intro like?" And I said, "Well, I plan on the intro just making fun of you for 5 minutes straight." He said, "Oh, that'd be funny." And I'm like, "Well, good, because it's true." But I told him what I love about the Old Testament is seeing Jesus come out in the Old Testament. I can see a foreshadow of a Savior in the initial beginning part of Genesis. And I love seeing that. I love seeing Jesus come out and scream out through the text of the Old Testament. I love it. I'm a Jesus guy. I think everybody in here is Jesus guys, or women too, Jesus people. I love it. And I relate to Jesus because it wasn't like when I became a believer, it really wasn't like this fear of hell and damnation or this fear of when I die, I'm going to be cut off from God eternally. It was this spark of who Jesus Christ was and who Jesus Christ is. And I fell in love with Him, of who Jesus Christ really is. And to be honest, like, I was talking to Adam Crowder yesterday, and he was like, "Man, you got your sermon done?" And I said, "Yeah, I got it done." He said, "You nervous?" I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty nervous, because I want to get up here and talk, and I want people to hear the Word, and I want them to walk away with something that's challenging, that's not just topical Joel Osteen type sermons." And I'm sorry if you listen to Joel Osteen, I really am. But I want them to walk away with something. And I said, "Adam, do you ever get nervous, or did you get nervous when you started preaching?" And he said, "Yeah, the first time I preached at Mac, I was really nervous. But I'd been a drill sergeant for 2 years at that time, and then I got this mental picture of me being a drill sergeant, and I would be the worst drill sergeant ever. I'd be like the guy, be like, 'Drop down and give me 50, or whatever you can do will be fine.'" So I got this image, like, after Adam said, and then I felt better because I was like, well, it could be worse, It could be worse. But he said, Grant, like, the giftings that God has given you and has given me, it causes us to be in the spotlight. And there's tension when you don't want to be in the spotlight. Like, I play in a band. I don't really want to talk about music because I'm here to talk about Jesus. But, when you play in a band, the biggest crowd I played to so far in my music career was a couple months ago. We played to 3,000 people, and it was really boring. And it wasn't very, I don't know, the bigger the crowds, it's comfortable and the more boring it gets. But when you preach, the bigger the crowds, the more terrifying it gets. I hope that goes away as I get older and I get used to it. But Adam said, you're going to be forced to be in the spotlight because you're called to preach and you're called to be a teacher. So God is going to put you in areas where it's going to force you to not want to be. But by doing that, He's going to shape you and He's going to grow you. And He's going to be there for you. And He's going to show up on Sunday morning. I was praying the whole way here as I was listening to Journey. I was like, oh man, God, please show up today, because I don't want to say the words of Grant Butler, because the words of Grant Butler are false. What I want to say is the words of the true God, Jesus Christ. And getting into Exodus 5, I'll go ahead and start reading Scripture and stop talking. Making bricks without straw. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey His voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." Then they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest He fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." The first This is the first time you're going to see God saying, let my people go. And it's going to happen 7 more times in chapters 5 through 10 in the book of Exodus. And if you remember, at the end of chapter 4, God told Moses to go out in the desert and meet Aaron, and they were going to go to the Israelites and tell them what the promises that God had told them. And he was going to give them signs and wonders. And after they did that, if you remember, the Israelites, they bowed down and they worshiped and they praised God's name. Getting into this text, though, it was a little uneasy for me because usually when you read a passage out of the Bible or verses out of the Bible and there's 2 parties involved, being a Christian and a believer, you always align yourself with the person that is either also a believer or who is following God. You never align yourself with the enemy of God. But getting into this, I could totally relate and align myself with Pharaoh. And the reason why is because I grew up in the church, but I wasn't a believer at all, and I hated God. And I can still remember having that hardened heart, and I can remember saying, God, I don't want to know you. I hate Jesus. Your Christians just make me mad and they annoy me. They're always on TV saying dumb things. I want nothing to do with these people. And I can remember saying, God, I don't want to know you. I don't care to know you. So I know you're there, but I want nothing to do with you. And getting into this, it resurfaced some things. And it was kind of nice in one sense. It put me in a rough spot, but I can remember what it was like before. I can still remember. I hope I never forget that because it does check me. It puts me in an area where I'm so blessed right now under the banner of grace that we live in and under the mercy that God has shown me and my family. I know a lot of people that for whatever reason it didn't happen and God chose me. I don't know why, but there's authority in that and there's mercy in that, and I praise His name for that. But at the same time, I can align with Moses and Aaron because Moses and Aaron are going out on faith. They're going in front of Pharaoh. If you remember, it says that Moses heard the promises through faith. So they go in before Pharaoh on the promises of what God has told them. They're walking in faith. I can align with that because, going to a place like Portland, Oregon, or working in a place like AWC, it's a struggle, and Portland, Oregon, nobody's gonna like us. It's worse than it is here. This community is a church community. The Midwest is pretty well a church community. There's a level of respect. It's funny when I tell people, I told the dude at the VP this morning that I was preaching this morning, and I think he thought I was joking. But I think if a guy like me, that looked like me, came up to me in the store and said, "Hey, I'm preaching this morning," I probably wouldn't believe him either. But I'm walking in faith, and I'm walking on the promises that God has shown me in my life and that God has told me. And I've never heard the audible voice of God, but I've heard these subtle screams, and I've seen things hit me in the face that I cannot deny. There is absolutely no denying. What's interesting also is that has used my wife to do things, to charge me in things, to be my backbone in a lot of things. Because I'm like the guy that likes to sit in the back and not talk. I was a kid that always listened to music and didn't want to talk. So I married a woman who likes to talk, so I don't have to. I'm going to be in trouble today. But I could align with both parties, and I was a little uneasy because, as a believer, we're always supposed to follow God, right? We're always aligned with Jesus. And then I can still remember this time there where I hated God, and I wanted nothing to do with God, and everything about God just would infuriate me. And I was very disrespectful to my parents, and I was doing a lot of just immature, dumb things, and continually walking away from God. But what we're going to see as we get further into this chapter is we're going to see how God shows up. But initially, it doesn't look like God showing up. We're sitting in teaching pool. Eldon Morehouse is somebody I really look up to. I don't know if Eldon's here today or not, but hey, what's up, Eldon? I see him waving at me. We're sitting in teaching pool, and Eldon said a lot of profound things this week that really stuck to me, and I remembered them. A couple weeks ago, Joel and Rachel Cedarberg got married, in Yorktown. And it was the first ceremony I've ever done. So I was really nervous because, a wedding, it's a very special event, and you're going to remember it the rest of your life. And so I just wanted everything to be perfect. And the way it was set up, it was down in Yorktown and Mars Meadow, and it was right on the riverbank. It was really cool. It totally fit the personalities of Joel and Rachel. And I go down there, and we do the ceremony. And, we get through it, and then the reception was there. And I wasn't feeling too well about how I did. I was kind of critiquing myself. And I'm walking, and Eldon and Louise are sitting down. And Eldon kind of grabs my arm. He says, "Hey, was that your first ceremony?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you did a good job." And he said, "They'll get easier as you do more. Just keep doing them." Back when Johnny Carson had the late night show, he would have a stand-up comic come on, right? And after the stand-up comic would do a skit, he would do a set. And after his set, if Johnny approved of his set as he was walking off, Johnny would give him a thumbs up. So essentially what I'm saying is, Eldon Morehouse, you're my Johnny Carson. I bet that's never been said before, but it has today. So I was like, well, if Eldon says it was good, then it's good, that's all the opinion I need. So, but I was walking, I get nervous, and I'm walking in this nervousness, and there's tension, but I see God's doing things, and He's preparing me for things, and we're going to see that. So moving on. But the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens." And Pharaoh said, "Behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens." The same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks, as in the past. But the number of bricks that they made in the past you shall impose on them. You shall by no means reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry, 'Let us go and offer sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on the men, that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words.'" Now, Pharaoh starts coming down on the Israelites harder. And I'm going to show you a video. It's only it's a minute long. It's a little video. You can go ahead and play it if you want, man. Doesn't look like very much fun, does it? It's probably safe to say if I said, "Hey, after service today, let's go down to the banks of the White River," I'm going to be the only dude showing up to make bricks. I wanted to show you that because in the next few verses, I'm going to get in a little bit of the mechanics of making bricks. But what's starting to happen here, Pharaoh's starting to come down on the Israelites harder, and he's starting to look at their cries and disregarding them fully, and he's starting to call them lazy. He's starting to view them as lazy, even though we know the Israelites weren't lazy. But you have to understand, God told Moses that He was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So Moses already knew this. Keep that in context. The Israelites already knew this because Moses and Aaron told the Israelites. So you kind of need to keep some of these promises right up front when you're going through this, because it's going to help you better understand why the Israelites are doing some of the things they're doing, or why they are not doing some of the things we think they should be doing. So, as Pharaoh starts getting in and saying, "You know what, I'm gonna make your burdens even harder." The Israelites didn't have a Kramer where we could call him up and say, "Hey, do this at the church now," and he comes in limping, and fixes whatever needed. They didn't have a Kramer that could hook up a trailer to his truck and bring him straw. As before, the Egyptians were doing that. So I'm going to read a little bit more, and then I'll get a little bit more in depth into this. But I want you to understand that before I do that, what you saw in that video, there was a guy preparing to make bricks. And he was basically in like a mud pit, and he was reaching down. And in the bottom of that is clay. And the farther you go down, the stronger the consistency and the thickness of the clay is. So you want to get down to as far as you can to get the stronger clay. And then when you bring it up, you're going to mix it with water. And then there's already some mud out there, and there's straw, and there's stubble. Stubble would just be like the debris of straw, broken parts of straw, what was left over. So they're throwing that in there, and a brick that is a brick that has straw in it is 3 times stronger than a brick that doesn't. And it's not necessarily like a long-term strength. It is a strength that takes place immediately. Where when you saw this guy putting the brick in the wooden mold, as soon as he would lift that up, that brick had straw in it, so it stayed in place. But a brick that didn't have straw with it, a majority of the time, as soon as you pulled that wooden mold up, it would immediately fall apart. So what was happening is you're doing the same amount of work, but your quota is what you're producing for your quota is far less now. And now, not only do you have to keep the same quota, you have to go out and find straw for yourself. And it's not like you're the only person going out looking for straw. Everybody is going out looking for straw. Keep in mind also that there's generations in the Israelites that have never seen anything but oppression. They've never seen anything but enslavement. They don't have a reference of time of like what it was like before they were enslaved. They don't have any memory except being slaves. So everybody is going out and looking for this, going out looking for straw. And then when they do find it, if they can, they have to carry it back. And it's not 10 or 20 yards away. They're going out searching. It's really a dire situation. And I think that in that there's this tension growing, though. Because you have the promises of God, but at the same time you have the world coming at you. And while the world's coming at you, it's easy to walk away from your faith. It's easy to walk away from the promises you've heard. The promises that you know you've heard. And sometimes you question those promises. You're like, God, I know you said this to me. I know you're doing this. But how come this isn't happening right now? We never pray the prayer like when something's going on in our life. We don't go, God, this is going on in my life right now. I need you to fix this in 6 years. We never say that. It's, God, I need you to do this now. I need you to show up now. Because this is going on. I need this to happen now. But we have to understand that our time reference, our timeline is faulted. It's not always what is right. And it's easier to see grace sometimes in the hindsight of suffering. I look in areas of my life, and when my wife and I were going through some problems right before I joined the internship, our financial stuff and just attack, I look back on it now and I can go, yeah, like God is doing things in this, and I'm glad. But like when I was going through it, I wasn't saying that. I was unhappy, and I was like, man, I was scared. I was like dropping weight, so that was kind of nice. But like the whole time, I was nervous, and I couldn't see God. And I'm going, God, I know you're doing something, but like it doesn't look like it out here. Like to me, it looks like I've misheard you. To me, it looks like I'm totally not doing what you're calling me to do. Then you start questioning these. And when you start questioning things, you start forgetting about the promises that God has called in your life. And these promises don't have to be these big earth-shattering promises. God calls us to do a lot of things. And we always as humans, we like to think of these things that they have to be this monumental things. Like we played in the summertime, it's like the festival circuit. And I usually hate playing Christian festivals because I like being in places where nobody are believers, and they're throwing beer on you because you're talking about Jesus. That's just where I like being, because I know there's more people to talk to. This year is interesting, though, because all the Christian festivals we played, we had by far more people come to faith after our set and come up to us. I was kind of like shooken by that, because I would say, well, I want to play in these areas, and this is where God has us. And I don't think He has us in the Christian festivals, and I think we're just playing the Christian festivals because they pay more, and I think we need to go to the secular festivals. And then we'd show up at a Christian festival, and 8 or 9 people would get saved after a set, and you're like, man, I put my foot in my mouth again. Like, God's doing things. It's not what I think is right. It's following blindly, listening with my heart rather than my ears and my eyes, and surrendering to Jesus Christ. We worship a very affectionate God. We worship a God who loves us. It's not a God that disregards us or doesn't care about us. And this is what God sent Moses to say to the Israelites. He said, God hears your cries. God sees your blood. God sees your oppression. Not only does He see all of this, He cares. And the Israelites, they bowed. They was like, He cares? Absolutely He cares. God sees the things that's going on in our lives. And it's not like He's, oh, you know what? I'll just leave you out here on your own. And then when it's time to come home. No. I harp on sanctification a lot, because I think sanctification is extremely important to the believer, as well as the gifts of the Spirit. And I harp on sanctification because you can see God doing something in your life every day, in the present day. It's not something that is something that's in the past. It's something that is happening today. You see, when you accept Jesus into your heart, when your heart is open and Jesus comes into your heart, at that moment you're justified. Now, when you're justified, you have salvation. So the one who is blameless took on the sin of the world and the coming sin of the world. So now you are blameless in God's eyes. But what happens is, there's a book called Holy Sanctified that A.B. Simpson wrote, and I was reading it. And it's like 110 pages or something. It was a real quick read. And it's all about sanctification. And in this book, he gives an analogy that from the human, the wretched, the sinful body of the human, he gives an analogy to a house falling apart. He says, when you go in to buy a house and it's falling apart, what's the first thing you start doing? You start rebuilding the house. You start taking it back. This is what happens when Jesus is in our heart and we are justified. We have salvation now. It's nothing that we can do. It's given to us. And now that we have salvation, God's coming in and going, you know what? I'm tearing down all the walls that have been built around you. This vessel of death that you've been living in, guess what? I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to destroy it because my Son's blood was shed for you, because I love you. So by doing this, though, I'm going to pull you in. And what happens is, as He pulls you in and draws Himself closer to you, you get shaped. You get put in areas that aren't fun. You get put in areas like where you got to stand in front of a bunch of people and talk. Sorry, you can laugh. You get put in areas where it forces you to move. It forces you to move your feet. And God is doing things in this, and it's really hard to see it sometimes. It's really hard to see God when suffering is going on. It's really hard to see God when a loved one is in deep pain, or a friend is in deep pain, or you got friends dying who aren't believers, and you don't understand why they don't believe when it's so crystal clear to you, and it hurts you. And it's like, where's God in this? Like, do you understand the difference from religion and Christianity? Do you understand why Jesus Christ isn't religion? Christianity isn't a religion? I'm glad you don't know, because I'm going to tell you. In Genesis 3, we see the initial act of religion in Scripture. And what happens is, as Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the forbidden tree, their eyes were open and they realized that they were naked. So what did they do? They sew, making up words. They put fig leaves together. Right? And but what they were doing, though, they were covering up what now they knew was true. So, and then what you see is, you see a loving God come in, because God comes into the garden and says, Adam, where are you? Well, God already knew where Adam was. But he's a loving God. He's giving Adam a chance to talk. He says, well, I was naked, so I hid. We put these fig leaves over ourselves so we wouldn't be naked anymore. God knew who told him he was naked, but God gave him the chance again to speak and said, well, who told you were naked? That right there is the first example of religion. How? Okay, I'll break it down even more. Religion is doing something that you do yourself to be in line with God. Alignment. I'll stop making up words. Where you do something that gets you your salvation. Where you do something that attains your salvation. What did God do when he saw the fig leaves? He said, no, and he gave them clothes. The religion didn't work. So now, it's more what you can do to get to God rather than the truth of what God has done for you. The price that was paid on the cross for you. And that's why I always harp on sanctification, because I love seeing God work in my life. And there's like days where I need to see God work in my life because I'm struggling. And things aren't always going the way I want them to go. And things are going on, and I start to question. And I see that. That's why it's so important to pray for your identity in Christ. Because your identity isn't in who you think you are. Your identity is in the blood. My identity isn't like the clothes I wear, or the length of my hair, how much ink I have on me. All that stuff's going to go away. I mean, the ink won't go away in this lifetime, but the next time it will, And none of that matters. That's not who I am. That's not my identity. The beard fools people. It makes me look like tough to some people. I'm really not. I'm laid back, But my identity is in the blood. My identity is as God has chosen. And in that there's authority and there's stock. It's always hard to accept that sometimes. I still struggle with a time or two or this whole week of being called to be a pastor because I haven't figured out yet how to put a sermon together and then still conduct my daily life where it doesn't disrupt everything. So my wife would be talking. I was like, doing my sermon, leave me alone, I'll be in the room doing my sermon. I did my sermon 12 times this week. Because I wanted to get it together, and I don't really take notes or anything. So I'm trying to find the rhythm, and I haven't, because I'm still in the initial part of my calling where I'm not in that rhythm of preaching on a weekly basis, and I'm not going to be here. I don't know for how many next week. Next week I'm in Maryland, and I'll be at a Unified Underground conference there, but. I still haven't found that rhythm of how I can walk my calling out and still not let everything crumble around me. But by that going on, I have to walk close with the Lord because in this, I'm struggling and there's tension. And you're going to see this with the Egyptians and the Israelites in these next few verses. You're going to see that there's tension growing. But in this tension, that God is doing something. And in one sense, it kind of feels like God had this tension there because he is pulling people. It's always I really like how Pharaoh said, I don't know who this God is. So why am I going to let your people go? Whenever you say that, you're going to find out really quickly who God is. He's going to show up. And I like seeing these things because I look in my life, I look in the life of this church, and I see God doing things. I was giving a guy a hard time, and he said, well, I really feel that God's going to open some doors out in California. And I said, well, I'm glad that by you following God, you get to go to California and I get to stay here in Indiana. That's awesome. But I love looking at that and seeing what God is doing. But what the Israelites are going through right now is brutality and oppression, enslavement. Then the foreman of the people of Israel came and cried to Pharaoh, why do you treat your servants like this? No straw is given to your servants. Yet they say to us, make bricks. And behold, your servants are beaten. But the fault is in your own people. But he said, you were idle. You were idle. This is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Go now and work. No straw will be given you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks. The foreman of the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble when they said, you shall by no means reduce your number of bricks, your daily task each day. Right here you have this, it's basically a domino effect. You have the Pharaoh, who is basically the highest of the high in the land. When you went in the presence of the Pharaoh, you bowed before him. Now, the taskmasters were put in place by the Pharaoh, and they were Egyptians. And the taskmasters appointed foremen, and the foremen were Israelites. It's pretty similar to like the Nazi era, World War II, where the Nazis put the Jews in Jewish ghettos and concentration camps eventually, and they would assign people from the oppressed and enslaved people to be over groups, whether it was a building or a cottage or a labor force. This was happening with the foremen. So what would happen is, if the quotas weren't met on a daily basis, Pharaoh would come down on the taskmasters. So by the taskmasters came down on by Pharaoh, they ultimately would come down on the foreman. And it's not like we see today in America where you might get called into the office or you might get in trouble. They came down with an iron hand. They would beat them. And it was a severe beating. It was the beating that you would see in the South America during the times of slavery. It was beating where you were intentionally hurting and destroying and damaging the body. So what happens in this, though, is there's this tension, because now the Israelites turning on their foremen also, because the foremen are also Israelites. They're enslaved, but they also work for the slave owners. And they have to essentially tell on their own people sometimes of what's not going on or what should be going on. So in this, you're seeing this domino effect, and this tension continues to grow. And we're going to see something happen here in these next few verses that continues to happen to this day. So when there's this tension growing and brutality is coming upon you, and you're crying out and you're going, I don't know where God is at in this. I don't see what God is doing. It's easy to, what we see next, and start walking out of the fellowship of God. So next, sorry, making sure you're awake, Judy. I know you are. They met Moses and Aaron, who were waiting for them. As they came out from Pharaoh, and they said to them, the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us a stench in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hands to kill us. All right, this is this succession. This tension is growing. So now you had one part where they cry out, and they're not seeing what they think should be happening. They're questioning, why are we enslaved? The foreman goes to the Pharaoh and says, look, we can't do this because it's not our fault, it's your fault. You're not supplying us with straw. So how do you expect us to do this? We can't do this. And then your taskmasters come down on us. That was the initial wrong step that the Israelites took. Why? Because they were looking towards Pharaoh for deliverance. Pharaoh couldn't give them deliverance. Pharaoh's heart was hardened. But they knew this, but they have forgotten it. So they look for deliverance in an area where they can't find it. And then the next thing they do is they turn on their leaders. How many times do we see that in this church today? I don't know how many times I said, if Vince Stoltz does this again, or if Adam Crowder does this again, or if Guy, I never say it about Guy because he never does anything wrong. But how many times you go, you know what? That pastor isn't a man of God. Look what he did to me, and it made me mad. So instead of going confronting your brother or your sister, you start talking. And Scripture calls it godless chatter. And then all of a sudden you have this epidemic going on in your church. And you take a healthy church, and all of a sudden it starts becoming divided. And then the people are turning on their leaders. And God has chosen these leaders to lead the people. It's not necessarily what I think is right. I get called out sometimes by Adam or a guy, and they'll call me in their office, or they'll take me out or something and say, hey, Grant, you can't do this, and this is why you can't do it. And then my wife will say, How come like your dad or Adam or Vince or Guy will say something and you listen the first time, but I can say something 20 times and you still don't listen? And then I say, well, honey, I just don't want to admit that you're right. You know? But if you want to hold people accountable, you have to be willing to let people hold you accountable also. And we see this going on in the church today. Isn't it amazing how long ago this was taking place? We still see this continue to happen in present day. This is still going on. So now you start walking out of fellowship with God. You start turning on your leaders. And now the last part of this, it's really interesting because I see this full circle. And I see that God's people are messy. You know, it's not that... A lot of people think that, you know, the Jews were the chosen people of God. And you're born Jewish, it's this free ticket into heaven kind of thing. And really, if you look at Scripture, God chose the Jews to follow Him. He said, I'm going to choose you as my people, and you're going to follow me. And here are my commandments, and here is what you are to do. And they walked out of that. So God's pulling them back in. But in this, there's all this tension, there's all this struggle, there's all this pain. And what we're seeing here is it's going to happen full circle, where I see this in my life, where I start to let sin in, and it starts out really small, and it starts out where it's like I almost don't notice it. And while I let this sin come into my life, it starts out really small, but then I start to rationalize my sin as it grows. And by rationalizing it, I belittle it, and I lose the conviction. And I no longer feel like I'm doing anything wrong. It's more of this is natural. Sinning was like the one thing that I really got. I mean, I never had to be taught how to sin, and I mean, I was great. I'm still great at it. I never had to read a book or go to a class and learn how to sin. It was just there. And if you let it creep in like that, and you don't cling to the cross and your salvation that Jesus has given you freely, all of a sudden the sin turns into bondage. See, God calls us past all that junk. And it's like God calls us past universalism. That's why He says, you know what, I see what you can do on your own. I see what you can do on your own. Look what happens. You pushed away the prophets. You spit on the law. You killed my son. But some of you are going to listen. I hope there's some people in here today that hate Jesus, because I'm glad you're here, and I want you to come up and talk to me afterwards. I hope there's some people today that are struggling. That's why I love playing shows. Last night we played with Head Noise. Head Noise is a hardcore punk band. They've been around for years, and it was really cool because my dad and my mom came out to the show. It was in Fort Wayne, and Head Noise is playing, and you know, Robert's all up there with his big mohawk, and he's just covered in ink, and his wife's just screaming. And my dad's like going to be 63 here in a couple months, and he's like nodding his head like to it. He's like, man, this is pretty cool, you know, it's a good mental memory I'll have. But it's like I see what you're doing, and I like being in places where we are able to plant seeds and we're able to be confronted. We play in places where like there'd be a microphone stand. And anytime you start talking about Jesus, this doesn't ever happen in Christian clubs. And maybe that's why some of the Christian clubs are kind of boring for me, because we go in secular clubs where there's a lot of stuff going on that you've probably heard me talk about 1,000 times. But things will happen where as soon as you start talking about Jesus, people will start getting angry. They'll start throwing beer on you. You'll have like a boom stand like this, and you'll be standing in front of it, and some guy will walk by as you're playing and push him into it so the mic comes into your mouth and breaks your teeth out. It's like they pull a Gigi Allen on you while you are trying to portray the gospel through song and follow what God has told you to do. And I like being in those places. I mean, it's not like I look forward to like getting spit on and getting cussed out and stuff, but it does draw me close, because I know when I go into those places, I can't go in there on my own, or I'm going to get chewed up and spit out really quickly. I know that when I'm walking into those places, I extremely have to cling to the cross, because on my own, I'm going to fail. But what we see happening next this is amazing, last couple verses, we see Moses questioning God. And what's amazing is that God already told Moses. Remember, he heard the promises through faith. God already told Moses what he was going to do. God already said, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart, and then I'm going to reveal to him who I am. He's not going to listen to you. So what does Moses do? He questions. He says, God, why did you send me here? Now these people are blaming all the things on me. They've turned on me. But you haven't done anything. And again, it's that question of, well, it's not in the timeline. Like I said earlier, when you pray and there's something going on, we want to see results immediately. Eldon said delay is not denial, and I really like that. But he also said, how do you really know it's faith until everything falls apart? I was out with Guy this week, and I said, man, I got this really cool quote. I'm reading an A.W. Tozer book, and I was looking online, and I had this really cool quote. And he said, what is it? And I told him the quote, and he said, that's really cool, but I got a better one. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, it's a quote by Hudson Taylor, and I can't remember it. I said, well, how good is it if you can't remember it then, So I'm not going to tell you the Hudson Taylor quote, because Guy couldn't remember it. But A.W. Tozer has this quote that says, any faith that needs support of the evidence of the senses, from the evidence of the senses, is not a real faith at all. Amen. And that really spoke to me. And when I preach, you'll see me do a couple things. I'll always ask you a question, and it's a question that I want you to ask yourself several times throughout this next week. And then I like to close by telling you a story that either I was involved in personally or something that I was indirectly involved with. And the question I want to ask you today, and I'm not going to answer it for you like I did last time I was up here preaching, but I want to ask you, are you walking in faith? You might think your faith is strong. Maybe it is. But maybe it's strong in some areas of your life and weak in others. But are you walking in faith? What does that look like? Maybe next time I'm back here, I hope some of you come up and tell me what it looks like for you to walk in faith, the places that it's taken you. Because follow God is going to take you to places where you don't want to be. Ask Adam Crowder where he thought he was going to be, and he was following God and where God took him. Ask Brandon Pritchard this last year, but following God, what it has done and the impact it has had on his family. It's not always this perfect, great, fun place to be. It's God's shaping you, and He's calling you in. I want to tell you this story about this. I met this girl, and we were playing in New York City, on the Lower East Side, and where we were playing at, it was a really bad part of town. And we get to the club, and this club's 3 stories high, and it was my first time in the city, so I was just kind of really in awe of how big that city is and how nice the people are. Not really, New Yorkers really aren't nice. Sorry if I probably just offended somebody from New York. I was just joking. But we play, and as we're playing, I see this girl walk out of the bathroom, and she's wearing this T-shirt of a very popular English black metal band. On the back of it, it has these letters that are this big, and it calls Jesus a word, and that is a very extremely derogatory word. And stop thinking about derogatory words, because I know you're probably trying to fill in the blank. But I really like it when people wear those shirts when we play, because now I see who's hurting the most.
Yes.
And now I know that this is where I'm going to focus my time, and I'm going to start praying, because I want God to give me a divine appointment. So she's wearing this shirt, and we end up playing, and the night goes on, and we load up the trailer, and we're trying to run down the promoter so we can get paid. And the next gig was 16 hours to the south. So whenever we have a long drive, we have this unspoken rule in the band where after you load the trailer and get everything in and you cash out and we do all like the rundowns on all the merch and all this stuff, you take about an hour and you just go do whatever you want to do. So like usually you just end up walking around or just hanging out, but you get away from everybody. You don't, because you're with these people all the time anyway, so they can get irritating. So you spend time with yourself. But it's like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning in New York City, and I don't really know New York City, and I don't want to find out the hard way how tough New York City is. So like I kind of walk around like a couple like block radius, and that like 3 and 6 months before we played, like one of my favorite authors, who was an exceptional memoir writer, had died. He was from New York City. And then one of my favorite musicians growing up, who was a devout atheist, the last couple years of his life, God opened his heart and he became a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, and he died suddenly, like 3 months before, and we were like 30 blocks away from his house. And I was pondering like the sovereignty of God. And I wasn't praying, but I was just like talking with God, like, you know, I can't believe the things that you've done for me, and I can't believe these things you're doing. And I was just like pondering the beauty of God, basically, and His mercy. And I sit down in front of the club we just got done playing in, and for some weird reason, my lead singer comes up and sits down next to me. And as soon as he sits down, the bar next door closes, and out walks this girl. And she's walking by, and I'm sitting, you know, we're just sitting on the sidewalk, and she walks by and she goes, "Oh, you guys are those Christians." Yeah, we're those Christians. She said, "Oh, you're that Christian band that just played here tonight?" I said, "Yeah, that's us, you know." And she goes, "You probably don't want to talk to me because I'm wearing this shirt." Like the front of the shirt was it was extremely blasphemous. And I said, "You know what? Your shirt doesn't offend me. It probably should, but it doesn't, you know." And then my lead singer, his name's Sean, he goes, "You know, I feel like Grant, like your shirt doesn't offend me, but it breaks my heart. And it breaks my heart because when I see you wear something like that, I know you're hurting. And I know you're taking that hurt and you're putting it on something where it doesn't belong. In this case, Jesus." And she starts talking to us, and like when I have like these divine appointments, I always pray, like, "God, give me some words. I just don't want to say like something dumb and cliche. Like because in a club you only have so much time, so I try to plant as many seeds as possible." And I said, "You know, can we just pray over you? Let's just see what Jesus is doing. Let's see what Jesus is talking, you know." And she's like, "Yeah, I think I would really like that." And we start praying, and throughout this prayer, she starts talking to us, and she starts crying, and she says, "You know," I think she was like 24, 25, and she's like, "You know, I was raised in a house where my mom left when I was young, and I had 3 other sisters, and I was the oldest, and my dad worked, and then he would come home, and as soon as he got home, he'd immediately start drinking, and he would stay drunk all week, and then when he was drunk, he would rape me, and he would just beat me, and just all these terrible things." And then she's like, "And then on early Sunday morning, my dad would stop drinking, and he would shave, and then he would take a shower, and then he would put on a suit, and then he would make us go to church. And then while we were at church, we were this good, happy family who had it together. And my dad was putting on this front." And she goes, "You know, like, and God allowed that to happen. So, like, she's like, I like you guys, but, like," she's like, "I have respect for what you do," but she's like, "I don't have respect for Jesus, and God allowed that to happen. That's not love. This God has failed me, and if that means I go to hell, so be it. I'd rather be in hell than be in heaven." And my lead singer says, "You know, like, I know you're hurting, but it sounds like to me that it's not Jesus that you're mad at. It's more of the problems that you had to endure with your dad." And she starts crying even more. And she says, "Yeah, you know," I'm like, I think she's 25. She's like, "I'm 25 and I'm on drugs. I have a 2-year-old daughter and I never see my daughter. And my grandma takes care of her. My grandma lives with her, or she lives with my grandma. And I'm like, I know what I'm out here is wrong. What I'm doing out here is wrong. But I just continue to do it. And like, I can remember feeling like that also, where you're walking away from God. You know that God is there. You know that God cares. But because you don't see it happening right before your eyes, you start to question. And you start to get bitter, and you let that bitterness grow. And then all of a sudden you just say, I'm done. And then you become indifferent. And when somebody hates Jesus, it doesn't really... I see that there's still love because they're still passionate. It's like the guy that is totally indifferent about it. I got like a curveball thrown at me like about Portland because my best friend lives out in Portland, and he's lost. He's going to listen to this too, but he's extremely lost. And I was like, man, I had this like, maybe it was a daydream or wishful thinking, but I had this like feeling that we were going to go out there and he was going to come to faith and his family was going to come to faith. And it was probably wishful thinking just because I love him so much. But they're moving back now, and I'm like, man, as soon as he gets here, like within a year or 6 months or a year and a half, we're going to be going to Portland. And it was like I started questioning, like, well, God, are you really calling us to Portland? Like, are you really calling me to the people of Portland, Oregon? And I started to wonder if God really was. I think he is. I hope he is. I want to get out of Muncie. But I just say that because the people in Portland are hurting. And like I'm tired of going there and then having to leave and wondering how many people aren't going to be there when I make it back that don't know Jesus. But if you want to bow your heads, we'll pray. Dear Father, just thank you for showing up today. I ask you to bless this congregation. I ask you to continue to stir the people that you are stirring right now, and I ask you to show up in the lives of all of us. And I just thank you for giving us salvation and giving a sinner like us the opportunity and the chance to live and grow in you. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
We're going to sing that song, Jesus, All to Jesus. And I just encourage you, whether you sing along or not, to be contemplating what that means for where you are right now, for it to be all about Jesus. Jesus, all for Jesus, all I am and have, and ever hope to be. Jesus, all for Jesus, all I am and have, and ever hope to be. Sing all of my ambitions, hopes, and dreams. All of my ambitions, hopes, and dreams, I surrender these into your hands. All of my ambitions, hopes, and dreams, I surrender these into your hands. For it's only in your will that I am free. For it's only in Jesus, all for Jesus, all I am and have, and ever hope to be. All I am, and all I am and have, and ever